Welcome to the entire plot of Crown of Midnight from Sarah J. Maas's Throne of Glass Part 2. If you're confused, you should probably watch these videos first before you continue with this one. Chapter 21. In Chapter 20, we realize that it is the 10th anniversary of the death of Celaena's parents. In Chapter 21 is Celaena's POV, walking through the forest with Fleetfoot, basically just trying to properly mourn her parents, but at the same time just get away from Adarlan because they're responsible for her parents' death. So the last thing she wants to do is spend a minute of daylight in the castle. Something interesting though is that while she's walking through this forest, she's thinking more about the traumatic events that happened in her time of Endovir rather than the actual event that happened 10 years ago today. So it's later that night and she decides to go back to the castle and Chaol is waiting in her rooms for her. It's kind of a sweet little thing, like obviously it doesn't make everything better, but he does remember that she has this weird obsession with chocolate cake. So when she comes back to her rooms, he has a plate of chocolate cake ready for her, and something about that's just really sweet. Chapter 22, Dorian is in the library going through all of his ancestral history to basically find out if there was anyone in his lineage who has had magic in the past. All he can trace it back to is the Queen Celaena, who was the Princess of Terrasen and the Queen of Adarlan over 1,000 years ago. This also causes Dorian to think about, not only because it was 10 years ago yesterday, but about Adarlan invading the Terrasen kingdom and how closely the kingdoms have been intertwined for over 1,000 years. Do you remember how Aelin Galathynius is the name that's kind of like floating around for this rebel movement? Dorian actually reveals that he knew Aelin Galathynius and they were children together. They were around the same age. He even thinks about the fact that they probably would have ended up married just because of how things went between the two kingdoms. Like that is how closely intertwined these two kingdoms were for years. And then new character alert, I guess, we have Aedion Ashryver. He was Aelin's cousin and he's actually still alive. He's actually a general in the king's army, the king of Adarlan. If that doesn't sound complex and complicated to you, it is. And then somewhere in all of that, his train of thought goes back to the fact that it's Chaol's birthday today and he wishes he wasn't stuck in a library. He should be spending the day with Chaol. But then he remembered that Celaena had a special little birthday surprise planned for him. So he's gonna let them have their day, even though that kind of kills him inside. And then he starts spiraling again because he's thinking about the fact that Chaol's the one who's got the girl and he didn't get the girl. And in his moment of like frustration, a bunch of books on the bookshelves just go flying off the shelves and like explode all over the library. And he can sense that there's still some power in his blood that's about to be released. So he needs to get out of there ASAP. We're actually gonna jump to Celaena's POV and she is preparing for Chaol's surprise and she's all nice and dressed up. And she even asked him to get all nice and dressed up and they meet up at the castle and they hop in a carriage and they go to a random old apothecary. But she takes him up to the rooftop where there's this beautiful open like ethereal fairy garden basically, and there's a private dinner for two, just for them. And this is actually really precious because Chaol reveals that no one's ever really like done something for him for his birthday. Like he's gotten gifts. Obviously Dorian just got him this fancy horse, but no one's ever like thrown a party for him. So it's a special little moment. Things are going really well. You know, they eat their food, they finish their food, and they're just gazing up at the stars. And then Celaena just decides to turn towards him and be like, so by the way, you know how the king has been giving me names to kill? Yeah, I haven't killed any of them. Chapter 23, Chaol is obviously like, hold on, what? Celaena tells him everything. Now Chaol's really conflicted because if you think about it, he's all about being loyal. Like that's his value, is loyalty. That's what he prides himself on, is how loyal he is to his kingdom. But then at the same time, he's realizing how relieved he is that she's not actually killing anyone, because that also goes against his values of honor. He's like, I don't know if I'm happy about this or if I'm absolutely spiraling because now I have to lie to the king about this too. And then Celaena reveals for the first time to us as the reader that she actually plans to run away. Like if she ever thinks the king is about to find out or if anything goes wrong, she is out of there. And then Chaol in that moment just tells her, I would go with you, which is crazy coming from Chaol because he gave up everything to be the captain of the guard at the palace. He literally gave up his family title, his family name. He gave up everything. Well, he still has the name Westfall, but you know what I mean. Like, he gave up his inheritance. He gave up everything to come to the castle to be with Dorian and to potentially serve Dorian when Dorian becomes king. And he's saying, I'm gonna leave all of that and I'm gonna go with you. Like, where you go, I will go. And then this could not have happened at a better point, but this is when Chaol and Celaena have their first kiss. And it is perfect. It is exactly the way it should be. Celaena and Chaol officially are together in a relationship. There's no more endless flirting where they're denying it the whole time. Like, they're actually officially an item now. But obviously they agree, like, we need to keep this a secret because this is gonna look really bad. If everything goes south, they're gonna run away together. But as soon as her time is up as an assassin for the king and she gets her freedom, either way, Chaol's gonna go with her. And then something that is even more precious is, you know, the ring Chaol gives Celaena in book 1? He realizes that she's still wearing it. And guys, I have to apologize. It's an amethyst ring. I don't know where I got ruby ring. I think I just got really excited. And I told y'all in my last video it was a ruby ring, but it's not. It's an amethyst ring. And I know that's a very big deal because you guys trust me to give you factual information. So I apologize. I'm sorry. Chapter 24. Let's go to Dorian's POV. He's gonna do something insanely dumb, like really dumb. For real. He decides that he needs answers about his power, so he's gonna go to Baba Yellowlegs, the Iron Teeth witch who's a part of the carnival. There are about 1,000 reasons why this is a horrible idea, but you know what? We can't change it. It happened, so let's just talk about it. Dorian tries to size her up and ask questions, basically to sense how legit she is and how much clairvoyance she actually has. In doing so, she talks a little bit about herself. She mentions that she's 500 years old, and don't get me wrong, like, she looks like an old lady, but she doesn't actually look 500. This is where we find out a little bit more about witches, because she shares that witches are actually half fae, half Valg, and both have very long lifespans, so we don't really know where witches get their long lifespans, probably a mix of both. But if you're like, what's Valg? That's a great question, because Valg isn't really in other fantasy worlds. Like, I feel like there's a lot of things like witches, vampires, werewolves, where you're gonna find them in most fantasy worlds, but Valg is very specific to Throne of Glass. But they're basically weird, creepy, demonic little things. We'll learn a lot more about them later, so I'm not going to harp on it too much right now. That's pretty much what they are. So Dorian asks her, is magic truly gone? And Baba Yellowlegs goes into something very interesting here. We know that magic disappeared, and she confirms, yes, magic has disappeared. Even magical creatures can no longer perform magic in Irelia. Mind you, Irelia is like the entire country that Adarlan, Eoway, Terrasen, and like all of these kingdoms were inside. Irelia is what the king of Adarlan is trying to conquer, this entire continent, right? Magic disappeared only in Irelia, apparently. There are other kingdoms on other continents that are not in Irelia who have magic, who were in Irelia when magic disappeared, went to a different continent, and now they have magic. Isn't that interesting? Baba Yellowlegs thinks it is. So Baba Yellowlegs, obviously, she kind of picks up what Dorian's putting down. Like, she's kind of smart. And she's like, listen, if someone so happened to have magic, wink, wink, she knows it's Dorian. She says if someone supposedly had magic when no one else on the entire continent did, and I wanted to figure out why that person was the exception, I would first ask myself, why did magic disappear in the first place? Based off her answer, Dorian's like, oh shoot, she's kind of picking up on the fact that I have magic, and she knows I'm the prince, and I could quite literally die if anyone finds out. So he's like, I guess you don't really understand why I'm trying to ask you. Haha, I was just messing around anyways. So then he books it and leaves. And as he's leaving, he runs into Roland, who was also kind of lurking. Dorian realizes Roland is kind of acting like he's been following him. Like, he's being kind of like a spy. But he decides not to call it out because honestly, things between him and Roland are actually getting a lot better, and he wants to give him the benefit of the doubt. Now we're gonna jump to Celaena's point of view. She decides to go stalk all the people on the list that Archer Finn gave her again. and they're all gone. Archer Finn tipped every single one of them off, and they and their families just left. She's livid for obvious reasons, and she debates killing him on the spot, but instead she says you have 24 hours for a whole new list of names, and then on top of that, I need actual proof and evidence of a rebel movement, not just names. Or she will actually kill him and he no longer gets a choice. This is also one of those moments where Celaena realizes that with one tip that the king was onto this rebel movement, a whole bunch of them were able to communicate and get out of there ASAP, which means that this group is pretty organized, and it makes her wonder if this rebel movement actually has a shot. Like if this is actually an organized group that stands a chance against the king. So we're gonna jump to later when Celaena and Nehemia are hanging out, and they're having some girl talk, and Celaena tells Nehemia all about her birthday dinner with Chaol and how they're officially in a relationship, all that cutesy girl talk stuff. They're having a really great time talking about it, and then Nehemia jumps right back into politics. And she's basically just talking about how there's been more and more pressure and the king is putting more and more force on the Eelway people. And then she does something bonkers. And we're talking like treacherous. We're talking traitorous. She asks Celaena to help her to free the Eelway people and go against the king. And not just go against him, but like overtake him. Get him out of the throne. Celaena is obviously like, we could be killed just for talking about this, first of all. Second of all, no, like that's not my place. I'm just an assassin. I'm just trying to get my freedom. What am I gonna do? You got the wrong girl. And then Nehemia brings up a good point. She was like, if you were just an assassin, why would the Queen of Elena call on you to help her? And I do think that is a really good point, because up until this moment, the Queen of Elena keeps talking about how Celaena's like chosen, it's her fate, and blah, 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 blah. And we're just kind of like, why? Like, why Celaena? Why, frankly, I wouldn't say a little nobody, because obviously she's a very notorious assassin, but like in the scheme of politics, like why her of all people? And then they end up getting in a full-fledged fight where basically Celaena says, there's no hope. I've just accepted the fact that the king is the king and he's gonna overtake all the continents, and basically we just need to make the best of our current situation, not try to make things 1,000 times worse by trying to overthrow a very clearly powerful man who cannot be overthrown. And then Nehemia calls her a bunch of unsavory names and basically just says, you're a selfish coward and I want nothing to do with you. And then she leaves. Now, here's the thing. I matched with the book. What do you think? I'm gonna read chapter 25 to you because there's no way that I can reword this, and it's quite literally half a page, so bear with me. One of them has to break, the queen said to the princess. Only then can it begin. I know, said the princess, but the prince isn't ready. It has to be her. Then do you understand what I'm asking of you? Yes. Then do what needs to be done. The princess nodded and walked out of the tomb, the darkness beyond her beckoning to her, and she turned back to the queen. She won't understand. And when she goes over the edge, there will be nothing to pull her back. She will find her way back. She always does. Tears formed, but the princess blinked them away. For all of our sakes, I hope you're right. What business do Nehemia and the queen have? Something's going on. I don't like it. Chapter 26, this is in Chaol's point of view, and he is a part of one of those royal council like hunting parties that they always do in those period films. And he's just kind of overseeing everything. So the king approaches Chaol. Hey, I need to question Nehemia tomorrow about the threat against her life, and I'm gonna need 6 guards outside of her door. No one goes in, no one comes out. This is very important. And it's especially important that you keep it a secret, even from the assassin Celaena. Chaol really struggles with this, especially because later in the day he's hanging out with Celaena and all he wants to do is tell her, because realistically, they're best friends. And then on top of that, no one will be able to protect Nehemia better than Celaena. So they're just, you know, hanging out as they usually do. And Chaol realizes something about his relationship with Celaena. Not only is he in love with her and willing to run away with her, but it occurs to him that he's thinking, even after they leave, he's thinking about marrying her, having a family with her. Like, he is in love with Celaena. He leaves her rooms and he's walking back to his rooms that night. As he's walking and daydreaming about his future with Celaena and what that would look like, he realizes that someone has snuck up behind him, but a tad too late, because they have given him the good old chloroform treatment and everything goes black. Chapter 27, Celaena's point of view. She goes to Chaol's rooms. Her and Chaol still go on those morning runs, and he didn't show up. She decides to go to his rooms, and he's not there. So then she goes back to her room because it's about time for her word marks lesson with Nehemia, and Nehemia doesn't show up, but honestly that kind of makes sense because they got in a really gnarly fight, and that's kind of how they ended things. So Celaena's not really surprised by that. So she decides to go out with the brand new list of names that Archer Finn has given her, and she decides to go stalk those people for a little bit, comes back in time for dinner, and Chaol is not at dinner. So she decides to stop by his rooms again, and he is still not there. So she decides to look around, and she does actually find a letter addressed to her sitting on his desk. And it says, "We have the captain." It then has an address, and it says, "Bring no one or the captain will die." And then it says, "You have to the end of the day." And this is where we first see the killing calm. This is something that is mentioned so many times in the series whenever Celaena basically just goes like assassin sicko mode, and basically if she goes into the killing calm, you know she's about to just demolish anything in her path. We're gonna jump over to Chaol's POV. He's officially waken up from his drugged stupor, and he's basically in a warehouse with a bunch of people he doesn't know, and then a bunch of other people with like hoods up so he can't see them. And then Chaol realizes this is most likely the rebel movement where Celaena was kind of snooping around trying to figure out some more about it, because he overhears one of the people say she has until nightfall. So he's like, oh shoot, like Celaena's coming. He realizes it's a trap for her, but at the same time, he feels bad for these people because he knows what Celaena's capable of. And although he doesn't know what these people are capable of, he knows it will not compare. Chapter 28, Celaena is armed to the teeth. Like literally everywhere on her whole assassin fit, because she put on the all black assassin fit for this. Everywhere where she could put a weapon, she has. And then she's jumping from rooftop to rooftop to get to this warehouse because, hey, they didn't say anything about coming through the front door. And then she says, when they took Chaol, not only did they make the biggest mistake of their lives, but they also made the last mistake of their lives. So she drops in through the 3rd floor window, and basically she just starts taking people out left and right. Literally, in Chaol's point of view, he describes it as she's cutting them down like stalks of wheat. Like she's just cranking through all these people. They do not stand a chance at all. So she kills her way all the way to Chaol, and then an old man steps in front of her. Like he takes off his hood and he steps in front of her and he's asking her to stop. And he basically says, we just wanted to get an audience alone with you. Like, we're not gonna hurt you. We're not gonna hurt him. Like that was just to get you here. Like, please stop killing everyone here. And then Archer Finn walks into the room. Obviously, I have a bone to pick with you and we'll figure that out in a second, but first things first, you're gonna release Chaol. Archer Finn's not doing it. He's like, I wanna talk to you. I wanna talk to you. So Celaena's like, okay, fine. You get one sentence to convince me not to kill you right here, right now. I have been working with Nehemia to lead these people for months. Obviously, that sentence catches Celaena's attention, so she decides to hear him out. And basically, this is where we find out that the reason Nehemia came to Adarlan in the first place wasn't for diplomatic duties, although that's why the king thinks she came. She came to help organize a rebel movement against the king. And she's been doing it with Archer. Celaena clearly wants proof of this, and Archer Finn points to Chaol and says, well, why don't you ask Chaol? He's the one who's been keeping secrets on threats to Nehemia's life, and we haven't heard from her. We brought him here because he was ordered to question Nehemia about her behavior. That's not the story we heard. We wanted to know what kind of questions he'd been commanded to ask, and we wanted you to see what sort of man he really is. Chaol confesses, I knew about the anonymous threat to Nehemia's life, yes, but I was told that she'd be questioned by the king, not me. Then Archer shares that they figured that out, eventually. So he turns to Chaol and says, but it's not questioning that they're going to be doing tonight, is it, Captain? Celaena starts sprinting back to the castle. She would not fail Nehemia, not when there were so many awful words left between them. Celaena hit the top of the stairs. The shouts behind her grew. People were calling her name, but she would stop for no one. She turned down the familiar hallway, nearly sobbing with relief at the sight of the wooden door. It was shut. She drew her 2 remaining daggers, summoning the words she needed to quickly explain to Nehemia how and where to hide. Celaena would deal with the rest, and she'd enjoy it. She reached to the door and slammed into it, exploding through the locks. I don't want to read this. The world slowed to the beat of an ancient, ageless drum. Celaena beheld the room. There was blood everywhere. Before the bed, Nehemia's bodyguards lay with their throat cut from ear to ear. She could hear the shouts growing closer, reaching the room, but their words were somehow muffled. Celaena stood in the center of the freezing bedroom, gazing at the bed and at the princess's broken body atop of it. Nehemia was dead. I've read this book 4 times. I still hate that part. Okay, chapter 30, let's go. Celaena is in total shock, obviously, and she's staring at the body, Nehemia's body, on the bed. Dorian is the first one to make it in the room, and he runs in and he sees everything, and he immediately goes to try to comfort Celaena. But then Chaol comes in, and then she realizes that Chaol had known and did not tell her, and she could have stopped this. So she turns around and she tries to kill Chaol. Many people try to pull her off of them, but Chaol tells them no, like, because he's her friend, she won't hurt him. She's just upset, but she won't hurt him. And then Celaena says, "You will never be my friend. You have always been my enemy." And then she grabs a dagger, strikes true, except for the fact that her hand freezes an inch away from his chest, and she's unable to move for half a second before one of the guards knocks her out. Chapter 31, Dorian and Chaol take Celaena's unconscious body down to the dungeons, and they put her in the cell actually right next to Celaena. And Chaol confesses everything to Dorian, that they were in a relationship. He knew about a threat against Nehemia's life, how they were taken by these rebels that Celaena was looking into. He tells him everything. And in doing so, Chaol basically tells him that, "I think your father, the king, did this." But Dorian says that's not possible, because he says, "When I was heading back to my rooms and I saw Celaena sprinting for Nehemia's room and I started to follow her, I was coming back from dinner with my family and my father was present the entire time. It could not have been the king." So later that night, Celaena wakes up from being knocked unconscious. Celaena is enjoying the fact that Celaena's down there a little too much, but Celaena is not even thinking about Celaena right now. All she can think about is the fact that her friend is dead, but something occurs to her. She knows that the king didn't do it. I think that's very interesting that she just knows this, but she does in this moment. I guess a murder, she understands that there's styles to killing and she can see patterns, and she knows that this does not match the pattern of the king's previous murders. And she would know that because he murdered her family. While she's thinking about all this, Celaena just won't stop talking about some nonsense, because Celaena's not in her right mind anymore. Like, that's very clear. But something she says does catch Celaena's ear. She mentions the fact that Duke Parrington is taking her to Morath. And that's kind of weird. We're not really sure why he's going to Morath yet, because it's kind of like out in the middle of nowhere in the mountains. And then Celaena goes back into her crazy psycho ramblings about things that don't really make sense. And she says something about the fact that her dreams are full of wings and shadows. Those two things. Like, she keeps bringing up the sound of wings and shadows. But then Celaena checks back out from what Celaena's saying, and she's remembering that the last words Nehemia said to her is, "You're nothing more than a coward." Those are not the last words you want to hear from someone, especially someone that you considered to be your best friend. This is what is sending Celaena into a spiral more than anything, is that is how they ended things in their friendship. Multiple days go by. Celaena has not tried to escape. She refuses to talk to anyone. And she drinks a lot of the water that they give her, because the water does have a sedative in it, because they didn't really know if Celaena would go through another killing calm again. So that's kind of how they've been handling it. But she's like, "Give me all the sedation I need." Like, she does not want to feel her feelings. She does not want to be awake to think about anything. She just wants to sleep. Chaol gets to a point where he's like, "Okay, I think we can release her." And he does have her sent back to her rooms, heavily guarded. But as he's taking her back there and seeing how she is, he kind of realizes that he's lost her forever, and he does not have a chance at anything with her ever again. Chapter 32 is extremely short, but extremely depressing all at the same time. And it's basically just Celaena trying to adapt to life without Nehemia, and she's not really. Like, she, for weeks upon weeks, just stays in her bed and does not get out of her bed. Chapter 33 is really unique because we actually have a whole new POV of a character we haven't met before. It's actually a young, nameless girl who is currently a slave at one of the EOA slave camps, Calcula. And she's working in the salt mines, because it's another salt mine prison camp, and she's using one of those axes, I guess, that they use to break apart the salt. She's just working another day in the slave camp, and she hears a bunch of murmurings, and she starts to hear a bunch of wailing going throughout the camp. She's really confused, and then eventually the whispers get to her that the Princess Nehemia is dead and was killed by the king of Adarlan. And she turns towards the guard who's standing right next to her, and she murders him with her salt axe. Chapter 34. Obviously, there's going to be huge repercussions of starting an absolute violent outbreak at one of these salt mines, but we're actually not going to talk about that for whatever reason for a really long time. We're just going to jump to the next chapter. We're going to be in Chaol's POV as he's talking to Ress. We haven't met Ress by name yet, but he's just one of Chaol's guards. And he's basically reporting back to him about how Celaena's doing, because Chaol has figured for the time being it's for the best if he just doesn't go near Celaena. And Chaol's just basically in a tough spot because not only does he have no idea what to do about Celaena, but surprisingly that's not even one of his biggest issues right now. Because of what happened in the last chapter, there's been a huge violent outbreak in Calcula, so he needs to try to help figure out what in the world they're going to do about that. And on top of that, they have to make a statement about how it wasn't the king's fault that she was assassinated. They need to figure out who in the world did assassinate her. And then just to spice everything up a little bit more, Chaol's father is coming to Aderlin. Now we're going to jump to Dorian's point of view because two big things are bothering him. You remember how Celaena had a dagger and was about to kill Chaol, but then her arm was literally frozen like an inch away from killing him? That was Dorian. He doesn't know how he called upon that power, but all he knew was in the moment that Celaena could not kill Chaol, and somehow he stopped her arm from stabbing him. It wasn't exactly the most discreet use of magic, so he's like, no one's been talking about it, no one's asked me about it, but clearly someone had to notice. So he's a little freaked out that something might come of that. But then on top of that, his power is starting to unleash itself. And Nehemia literally told him, although he didn't realize that's what she was telling him at the time, but he's pieced it out since, that as soon as his power awakens, to come to him and she would help him. But now he can't go to her because she's dead. He has no one to go to, and now he has this absolute monster of power and he doesn't know who to talk to or what to do about it, let alone how to control it. Then we're gonna jump to Celaena's point of view. She is still reeling and grieving over Nehemia's death, but it's getting to the point of obsession with finding out who the killer is. So she's thinking over every assassin she's ever known and what their style is to kind of see what matches up. And then it occurs to her, she does know an assassin with this kind of killing style, and she's seen it before. Grave from book 1. He was one of the men in the competition to become the king's champion. Chapter 35. Celaena is leaving her rooms for the first time since Nehemia's death. So she puts on all of her assassin gear. She goes down to the tomb of Elena and Gavin, and she grabs Damaris, which is Gavin's sword. She straps it onto her back, and she decides to go hunt down Grave. He's pretty easy to find, and when she does find him, it's like he knows why she's there, so he is booking it. She's chasing him through the streets until she finally corners him in a dead-end alley. All she wants to know is who hired you. Of course, he's not being compliant, so she has to resort to some old assassin tactics to get answers. Chapter 36, this is actually in a mix of Dorian and Chaol's POV as they're in one of these council meetings. They're basically debating with each other on how they're going to handle the outfall of Nehemia's death when Celaena walks in, and she is carrying Grave's head. She straight up walks to one of the men on the council, Minister Mullins or something like that, and she drops the head on the table in front of him and she says, "I think this belongs to you." And then in front of everyone says you shouldn't be so sloppy when ordering the assassination of such an important person. He shouldn't have picked an assassin who had obvious ties to him. I think he's actually the one who put Grave in the competition. And then on top of that, he was in possession of some of Nehemia's jewelry. And then she walks up to the king with a list of names and hands it over to him. It's a list of all the people she murdered in the warehouse when she went to rescue Chaol, because technically these people were a part of the rebel movement, and they are dead, and there is actual proof of their death. So she just took advantage of that and wrote all their names on a list and gave it to the king, being like, hey, I found all these people a part of a rebel movement, I killed them for you. I say this is all in Chaol and Dorian's point of view because we're watching this whole thing from their eyes, and they are just terrified and they are horrified and basically saying that she's unrecognizable, and she literally just looks like dead inside. Like, she is not the person they know her to be. So we're gonna actually go into Celaena's POV, but a couple hours later that day, because she is back at Archer Finn's townhouse. Basically, he just tells her that Nehemia was leading the rebel movement. Like, yeah, he helped her, but she was the face of it. we need you in her place to lead this rebel movement. And she's back at this whole, like, why me? Like, why is everyone so obsessed with me leading some sort of rebel movement? No, thank you. Like, I do not want to be a part of this. But then she does let him know that she did get justice and she did kill the person who killed Nehemia, and then tells him that he has 5 days to get out of Dodge because that's how much the king gave her to kill Ashryver. Now we're gonna jump to Chaol's POV the same night. Remember how I said his father was coming into town? Yeah, he's here, and they're having a dinner together. There's really no other way to say it. His father sucks. He's just a slimy, crusty man. There's really no other way to put it. He's just so gnarly. And I guess this is like an awkwardly silent dinner because they really have nothing to talk to each other about. It occurred to Chaol, when did Celaena sneak out to kill Grave? Because he has had her room crazily heavily guarded since the death of Nehemia. Although we know it's because of the secret passages, but he doesn't know that. And then I guess Chaol's dad gets down to the reason why he came, and it's basically that Chaol's little brother is not fit to rule in Aniel, and he basically wants Chaol back, like, badly. But he's not willing to be a decent dad in order to get him back. He's just gonna continue insulting him and being a horrible father, and then acting like he owes him his life. I don't know. It's an interesting dynamic, to say the least. So obviously there's nothing Chaol wants less than to go back home to Aniel. Chapter 37. So Celaena decides to go back to Nehemia's rooms and investigate, because clearly there's so much that Celaena just didn't know about her best friend. Like, Nehemia was keeping so many secrets, and Celaena's just trying to put a finger on what else she might be missing. Obviously, when she goes to the room, like, all of the blood in the actual murder scene is cleaned up, but all of Nehemia's possessions are still in her room because there's no one to come get them. So Celaena starts going through her things, and of course she finds a lot of books and papers and pages just full of word marks and a bunch of things written in Ilwe as well. But Celaena does see in the common tongue, it says, "Do not trust," and then she drew a symbol. It's described as looking like a mix between a wyvern and a snake. We have no idea what that means. We've never seen this symbol before. And then the eye riddle that they've been trying to solve, only with the eye can one see rightly, that one, that's also written in the back of the book. And then a couple things occur to Celaena. Nehemia pretended like she had never heard the riddle before when Celaena told it to her. But it occurred to her she learned the riddle from Davis. And Davis was helping lead this rebellion that Nehemia was also leading. So Nehemia knew what the riddle was the entire time. Obviously, she didn't know the answer to the riddle. There's just a lot of things that are popping up now where Celaena's like, what else were you keeping from me? And then Celaena has an absolute light bulb moment, and she sprints back to her rooms to go down to Gavin and Elena's tomb, because she realizes that Damaris is the answer. So the sword Damaris has like the pommel, or like the metal decal at the bottom that's on the handle, and there is an eye on it. And the hollow eye on Damaris matches the eye in the wall. So she goes and she holds the sword up to the wall, and she looks through it, and sure enough, there is a poem written on the wall that you can only see when the two are lined up perfectly. By the Valg 3 were made, of the gate stone of the word. Obsidian the gods forbade, and stone they greatly feared. In grief he hid one in the crown of her he loved so well, to keep with her where she lay down inside the starry cell. The second one was hidden in a mountain made of fire. There all men were forbidden, despite their great desires. Where the third lies will never be told, by voice or tongue or sum of gold. A lot to unpack there. So this poem is about 3 things, and 3 very important things, but 3 what? And why are they important? And what do they even do? So by the Valg, which is like the first phrase. Remember, Valg is what the witches are half made of. They're half Valg, half Fae. So that's that weird, like, creepy demonic thing that we talked about that we don't really know much about yet. Then Celaena realizes the obsidian stone, the king, Harrington, and Roland, and what used to be Cain, they all have obsidian blackstone rings. She realizes more about the poem as we go, but that's just like some of her initial observations. And then obviously the mountain made of fire, she's like, okay, that's clearly a volcano, but there's none of those in Irelia, so I don't really know where to go with that one. And so naturally she turns to Moore and she's asking him some questions about the riddle, and of course he's being sassy and giving a lot of non-answers and refusing to say anything. And then he mentions something about Nehemia and about a time that she was down in the tomb. And he's specifically talking about the night that Celaena was attacked by a Ridderak. And then it occurs to Celaena that she did not show Nehemia the tombs until after that. Yet Nehemia acted like she didn't know that they were there. She acted surprised, and she acted like it was her first time seeing everything, when in reality she'd been down there before. Yet again, more lies about Nehemia. It also kind of sucks because she literally just died. It's such a horrible and brutal death. And so the last thing you want to realize about her is that she might not be this perfect person that you thought she was. But in all reality, like, this is really frustrating. And Celaena really needs to know answers to these things. And it's like, if they had worked together before Nehemia had died, they might have actually gotten answers, but instead Nehemia let her think that she was alone in all of this. And so after talking with Moore and after piecing together a lot of things, she realizes that Nehemia was looking for these 3 things, and the locations described in the riddle could clearly be anywhere. So it occurs to Celaena that Nehemia was looking for whatever these 3 things were. Kind of in this moment that Celaena decides, you know what, if Nehemia was willing to die looking for these 3 things, I'm gonna find them for her, like in her honor, I guess. But then it occurs to her that in order to even find them, she can't stay in Irelia, but the king will never let her leave. Unless for whatever reason he needed her to assassinate someone in an entirely different country, which doesn't really seem like it's the case right now since he's so obsessed with this rebel movement. She's trying to brainstorm basically how to figure this out once she's stuck in the castle. And then it occurs to her that she can't even trust Chaol anymore, so she doesn't even know who to go to anymore because Nehemia was her person. And then the Queen of Elena shows up. Finally, she's been nowhere to be found when we've needed her most. Although I am frustrated with the Queen Elena, and when she chooses to show up and not, she does thankfully tell Celaena that Nehemia did not feel any of the pain. She's now in a safe place and that she wasn't afraid when she was murdered, that she was strong up until the end. So this does give Celaena some healing that I think she definitely needed. I really do think it's because of this moment that Celaena does decide that night that she's finally ready to bestow the last honor she can on Nehemia and visit her tomb. Now we're gonna jump to Chaol's POV because he notices that Celaena's leaving the castle and he decides to follow her. And then he realizes that he followed her to Nehemia's tomb. He clearly recognizes that this is a very intimate moment. It's very private and he definitely should not be here and he needs to give her some space. So he decides that he's going to leave. But right as he's about to leave, Celaena does something very interesting and unexpected. She starts to sing, and not just like sing a pretty song, like it's actually described as being not very beautiful sounding at all, and it's like a lament, like a funeral dirge. But the thing is it's not in a language that Chaol recognizes. It doesn't even sound like the language of Terrasen. It sounds like an ancient language. And he's absolutely entranced and confused and he's listening to her sing this entire song, and then she just stops and turns and sees him. And they're just like standing there looking at each other. I don't know, if I were him and if it was late at night and this chick just tried to kill me like a month ago and she's looking at me like that in the dark after I just witnessed a moment I should not have witnessed, I would be deathly afraid that I would be dead in 5 seconds. But she just looks at him and then she walks away. Chapter 38. Celaena's gonna go to the library, but she runs into Dorian, who's in the library. She doesn't know, but at the time he's actually looking for more on magic to see what he can find about what kind of magic he even has. When Celaena comes in, so he kind of closes the books and puts it off to the side. He's kind of walking on glass around her because he's trying to feel out, like, is she okay? This is the first time really talking to her since Nehemia died. This is also the first time he's seen her outside of her death when she wasn't like in full-blown 110% assassin mode carrying the head of another assassin. But she's surprisingly normal and they end up hitting it off and laughing and talking, and he basically says it felt like the old days again. Now we're gonna jump to Chaol's POV because Chaol is just trying to get away from his father, but then he's also just trying to get away from his men right now and find some time alone, and he knows he's not gonna find any of them in the library. But who he does find in the library is Dorian and Chaol just laughing it up, having a good time. So he goes to the librarian and he asks her if they have any books on funeral laments or dirges sung at Terrasen funerals. And the librarian says that no, like they weren't even written down because they were just passed on through the culture. Unfortunately, that culture is gone now. Unfortunately, because the kingdom was conquered, like people don't really know their songs anymore. So Chaol is like, well, it might not have been the Terrasen language because it sounded so foreign to him. So he's like, what about any language? Like any ancient languages? Like, do you have any books on any dirges or funeral songs? And then the guy shares with him and he's like, you know what? I don't really have any books like that, but it's interesting you say ancient languages because technically in Terrasen, I did attend a funeral once years and years ago, and they actually did sing a funeral dirge in the ancient language, the language of the Fae. And then it hits Chaol. And this is where stuff starts getting good in this book. What did she say to him when she almost murdered him? You will always be my enemy. That was a very interesting choice of words. Her parents were slaughtered by the king. That is not a treatment that any Terrasen citizen would receive, which means that Celaena had to be of noble heritage. Her parents had to be one of the noble families of Terrasen, which means that if Terrasen ever got back on its feet and Celaena, being the absolute powerhouse that she is, decided to join them, it would be over. Chapter 39, Celaena is on the rooftops watching Archer Finn, as she does in her assassin stalky way, and she notices a lot of rebels coming in and out of his townhouse, and most all of them she recognizes because she's been stalking all of them for over a month now, but there's one that she actually doesn't recognize at all, and he's a cloaked figure, so she's a little confused because she cannot identify this person. And she does actually debate following them, but she decides that she just does not care anymore. Her main goal now is to find whatever these three random things are that Nehemia was looking for before she got killed. So in the library earlier that day, Dorian did invite her to dinner in his rooms, and so she decided to take him up on it. So after she's done stalking Archer, she comes back to the castle in time for dinner and stops by Dorian's room, which is surprisingly very humble. Like, it's very big, but it's not super ornately decorated, and he doesn't really let the servants come in and clean it all the time. And she just realizes it makes her like him more. Most people just assume he's like a very stuck-up prince and that he's going to be like his father, but she realizes that there are just so many things about him that point to the opposite. And they just have a good night talking, and she does end up like talking on his couch with him for a long time and ends up falling asleep. And there's like this really sad moment where Dorian realizes that she hadn't seen his rooms before Nehemia's death. And so it's probably the only place in the entire castle that she doesn't have associated memories with Nehemia. So he basically just makes a mental note to invite her over and let her know that she can come whenever she wants to be there. And that's just a really sweet friendship moment. I love that for them. The next day, Celaena is back in the tomb and she's basically trying to figure out the riddle again. Mort is being absolutely no help. The Queen of Elena's nowhere to be found. And then it occurs to her that she needs to talk to someone. Perhaps someone who's like 500 years old with clairvoyance. She decides that she's going to talk with Baba Yellowlegs. Let me just tell you that the next chapter is very eventful and it is going to start an absolute chain of events. And for that reason, I'm actually going to stop part 2 here, and you can subscribe to get notified whenever I post part 3. But for now, you should hang around and watch some of my other Sarah J. Maas related videos, and I'll see you next week for a brand new reading vlog.